The rain that night didn't fall in drops. It whispered. It slid through the cedar branches in long, mournful breaths, like the forest itself was exhaling something it didn't want to hold on to. I remember sitting in the driver's seat of my old Volkswagen Westphalia, watching mist curl through the beam of my headlights, and wondering why the silence beyond the rain felt so deliberate, as if the woods were waiting for something. My name's Eli Turner. I'm 36, and for the last 8 years, I've been traveling up and down the Pacific coast in my van, documenting forgotten campgrounds for a personal project. I thought I understood loneliness, but that night, parked along an unmarked access road near the Olympic National Park boundary, I learned there's a kind of solitude that doesn't want to be observed. It started as a detour. I'd planned to stay near Lake Crescent, but every site was either closed or full, and when I saw a hand-painted sign half buried in moss that read Cedar Hollow, 3 miles, I figured it was some old private spot from before the park's expansions. The road narrowed into mud, hemmed in by ancient cedar trunks so wide they blocked the moonlight. My headlights kept catching movement between them. Not clear shapes, just the sense of shifting. Maybe branches, maybe the wind. I told myself that. You do that when you're out there alone. You rationalize the things that make no sense. When I finally found a clearing, it felt like a forgotten world. Moss blanketed everything. The picnic tables, the rusted fire rings, even the road itself fading into soil. My van's engine clicked softly as it cooled, and for the first time that day, the rain eased. That's when I heard it. Faint laughter. High-pitched and distant, echoing through the trees. Children. It couldn't have been real. Not that deep in the park, not in a closed campground, but it wasn't just sound. It was rhythmic, like a game. A call-and-response chant that rolled through the fog. I stepped outside with my flashlight, the beam weak against the wall of mist. "Hello?" I called. "Is anyone there?" The laughter stopped instantly. Not faded, stopped like someone pressed pause. The silence that followed was thick, muffled by the moss, and I swear I could feel it pressing against my chest. Then, from somewhere to my right, a stick cracked. Just one. Close enough to make me freeze. I didn't go looking. I told myself I was being paranoid, locked the van doors, and tried to sleep, but the forest doesn't let you rest when it's watching you. Around midnight, I woke up to a tapping sound on the window near my head. Soft, deliberate, tap, tap, tap. I sat up, heart hammering, and flicked on the dome light. Nothing. The condensation on the glass had smeared patterns across it, but in the foggy streaks I thought I saw small handprints, too small to belong to any adult. Morning came like a fog dream. Gray light filtering through the cedar canopy, dew clinging to every surface. For a few hours it felt almost normal. I made coffee on the camp stove, walked the perimeter of the clearing, and found the remnants of old campsites, scorched stones, broken lantern glass, a rusted tricycle half sunk into the soil. That stopped me cold. The frame was orange, barely visible under the moss, but the plastic handlebar streamers were still intact. It looked like it had been there for decades. I should have left then. Every instinct told me this place wasn't right, but curiosity or pride kept me anchored. I was documenting forgotten campgrounds after all. Cedar Hollow was exactly what I came for. Still, something about the tricycle gnawed at me. I brushed away the moss and saw faint carvings in the bark of the nearest tree. Circles, repeating circles overlapping each other like ripples in water. I took a photo and went back to the van. That night, the laughter returned, louder this time. It circled the clearing, weaving between the trees, sometimes close enough that I thought I could hear breathing between the giggles. When I turned on my flashlight and swept the beam, I saw nothing. But I noticed something different in the trees. The carvings. There were more now, dozens of them, etched freshly into the cedar trunks that had been cleaned before. And in the center of the clearing, where my campfire had burned down to embers, someone had arranged small stones in that same circular pattern. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of my van door creaking open. Not fully. just an inch, maybe two. The cold air poured in, smelling of wet bark and iron. I reached for the door handle to slam it shut, but when I did, I caught sight of movement outside. Shadows, short, quick, darting just beyond the reach of my headlights. I turned the ignition, but the van sputtered and died. The battery light flickered once and went out. For the first time in years of traveling alone, I felt genuine panic. Not the kind you can talk yourself out of. The kind that makes you whisper to yourself just to stay tethered to something human. I sat there, gripping the wheel, whispering, it's fine, over and over. The whispering outside began then. Soft voices, not laughter anymore, just low murmuring like children praying. The words were impossible to make out, but the cadence was slow, deliberate, and ritualistic. I could hear them moving around the van in a circle, their feet crunching wet leaves in rhythm with the chant. And then, all at once, it stopped. The forest went silent again, the kind of silence that feels alive. I waited for minutes, maybe hours, until the first hint of dawn seeped through the fog. The van started on the first try. I didn't pack, didn't look back, just drove until the dirt road turned to asphalt again. But here's the thing. 2 days later, when I finally pulled into a gas station near Forks to clean up and rest, I noticed something scratched into the paint on my van's rear hatch. Circles, the same pattern from the trees. 3 concentric rings, uneven but deliberate, as if drawn by a small hand. I don't know when it was made. Maybe that night, maybe before. But when I asked a local about Cedar Hollow, he frowned and said, "You shouldn't say that name out loud." I didn't understand what he meant, so he told me a story. About a group of homesteaders who settled near the park in the early 1900s, a small logging family with 7 children. When the lumber company shut down, they refused to leave. Winter came early that year. No one heard from them after the snow thawed, but hunters found their camp the following spring. The parents were gone, and the children had carved circles into the cedar trees surrounding the clearing. People said they believed the forest would protect them if they drew its symbol. The park closed that section years ago after hikers went missing near the same area. I listened, trying to smile it off, but my stomach turned cold. Because I knew those carvings weren't old, I'd seen the knife marks still fresh, the sap bleeding. I asked where exactly it was, but the man just shook his head. "You don't find that place," he said quietly. "It finds you when it wants to." That night, I parked at a legitimate campground near the coast, full of lights, people, music, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even surrounded by laughter, I kept glancing at the tree line. I told myself I'd leave Washington in the morning. Yet when I woke up, the world was gray again. The same mist, the same smell of cedar, and a faint sound drifting through the trees. Distant, childish laughter carried on the wind. I didn't pack up right away. Maybe I was in denial, or maybe I just didn't want to believe that the sound I was hearing was the same laughter from Cedar Hollow. But it was soft, airy, repeating the same rhythmic pattern as before, like a game of hide-and-seek whispered through fog. I sat on the van's step, coffee in hand, watching the mist roll across the campground. Families were waking up around me, kids running between tents, dogs barking. It felt normal, safe. But that laughter, it didn't belong to them. It came from the tree line behind my site, the side no one else camped near, where the cedars grew darker and closer together. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, but when I looked closer, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Hanging from one of the lower cedar branches, tied with thin twine, were 3 wooden rings, roughly carved overlapping each other, the same symbol from the trees in Cedar Hollow. They swung gently, clinking against each other with the breeze. I walked over, telling myself it must be someone's craft project, maybe kids playing around. But when I touched one, it was damp and sticky. Sap, fresh. Someone had made it last night. That's when I saw the footprints. Bare feet, small ones, pressed into the wet soil leading from the woods toward the back of my van. They didn't go past it, just stopped there, facing the doors. I packed up fast. Within 15 minutes, I was back on the road, heading south toward Aberdeen, telling myself I just needed to leave the park. I didn't even realize I was gripping the wheel so tight my hands had gone numb. Every few miles, I checked the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone walking behind me. There was no one, of course. Just miles of fog-drenched highway and endless green walls of forest. By the time I reached the town of Humptulips, just a name on a map and a gas station with one pump, the rain had picked up again. I pulled over, needing to breathe. The attendant was an older woman, maybe in her 60s, hair silver and pulled back tight. She looked at my van, then at me, and her expression changed. "You came down from the park, didn't you?" she said. I hesitated. "Yeah, Olympic? You know it?" She nodded slowly, glancing past me toward the woods. "You didn't stay up near the cedars, did you?" Something about her tone made the hairs on my neck rise. "You mean Cedar Hollow?" I asked. Her face went still. Don't say the name. It was the same warning the man in Forks had given me. I almost laughed. It felt absurd, like they were all in on some local superstition. But then she leaned forward, her voice low. "You see any carvings? Circles?" I didn't answer, but I guess she saw it in my eyes. "Then you need to wash it off," she whispered. "The mark draws them. The children. They follow the sign. You let it stay on that van, they'll find you again." I didn't even ask who they were. I just asked for a hose. She pointed to the side of the building, and I scrubbed the back of my van until the paint looked raw. But as I worked, the air grew colder. The smell of cedar hit me again, strong, like it was coming from inside the engine. When I turned around, I swore I saw movement in the tree line behind the gas station. Just shapes, small, darting between the ferns. I dropped the sponge, heart hammering, and for a moment the forest went perfectly still. Then, faintly, came that same giggle I'd heard before. The woman called out from inside. "Don't look at them." I froze. "What do you mean, don't look?" She came out, pale, eyes darting toward the woods. "They want to be seen. That's how they remember you." Her words didn't make sense, but in that moment, I didn't care. I got back into the van and drove until the trees gave way to open fields and the sky turned pale with evening. By nightfall, I reached a small rest stop off Highway 12, empty except for a single truck and a picnic table. I parked beneath the light, made sure the doors were locked, and tried to calm down, but it's hard to find peace when your own mind doesn't trust what's real anymore. Around midnight, I woke up shivering. The van heater was off, but it wasn't just cold, it was damp, like the air itself had crept in. The windows were fogged again, the condensation thick enough to blur the outside lights. Then I saw them. Handprints. Dozens of them, pressed against the inside of the glass. I didn't move. Couldn't. I just sat there, staring. They were small, each one no bigger than a child's, and they covered every window. My breath came shallow. I tried to convince myself I'd done it somehow, maybe while cleaning earlier, but then one of the handprints slowly dragged downward, leaving a streak in the fog. Someone was outside. I turned the key. The engine roared to life this time, and I slammed it into drive. As I pulled out of the rest stop, the headlights swept over the trees ahead, and for a split second, I saw them. 7 figures standing between the trunks. Small, motionless, each one with a crown of cedar branches on their head. Their faces were gray, their eyes pale and hollow. But what froze me wasn't their stillness. It was the way their heads turned, all at once, following the van as I sped away. I didn't stop driving until the dawn broke over the horizon, until the forest had thinned into open farmland. I pulled over near a field just outside Elma, shut off the engine, and cried. I hadn't done that in years. Not since my brother died, not since I started this whole journey trying to escape the noise of life. But now I realized some silences are worse than noise. When I finally calmed down, I saw something on the passenger seat that hadn't been there before. A cedar twig tied in a loop. That was 2 years ago. I've been back on the road ever since, traveling different states, never staying in one place long. But sometimes when I park near thick woods or wake to the sound of rain against the van roof, I catch that same faint smell of cedar. And every time I think about what the old woman said, about not looking, about not letting them remember me. But sometimes I wonder if it's already too late, because lately when I sleep, I dream of laughter, high, distant, circling me in the fog. And when I wake, I can still hear it fading, like the forest whispering my name. And this morning, I noticed something carved into the cedar panel inside my van, right above the driver's seat, 3 uneven rings overlapping. I didn't carve them. I stared at those 3 rings carved above my seat for what felt like hours. The wood was shallowly gouged, recent, maybe within a day. I ran my fingers across the grooves, hoping I'd find some rational explanation. Maybe I'd scratched it accidentally, or maybe it had always been there and I just never noticed. But my fingertips came away sticky. Sap. Fresh again, and beneath that faint resin smell was something else. Damp earth, as if the forest itself had reached into my van while I slept. That's when I realized it wasn't just about seeing them. They'd marked me. The symbol was theirs, and somehow it followed wherever I went. I drove for hours without a plan, just west, back toward the coast. I thought maybe the ocean would feel cleaner, emptier, farther from the heavy, watchful presence of those trees. By afternoon, I ended up near Calalock, where the forest meets the sea. The campground there was open, dotted with families and campers, the sound of gulls mixing with crashing waves. It should have felt safe. But when I looked at the line of cedars along the bluff, they seemed darker than they should have been, like shadows cast before the sun even dipped. That night, I parked my van at the edge of the lot overlooking the water, engine still running, too afraid to turn it off. The sunset bled through the clouds in dull streaks of copper and violet. I kept telling myself this was where it ended. Just one night near the ocean, one deep breath, and I'd drive south until the memory of Cedar Hollow was nothing but a story I'd tell myself to stay humble. But fear has a way of waiting for silence. Around midnight, the wind picked up, whistling through the cracks of the van's frame. I heard something faint beneath it, a low humming, barely audible at first. It wasn't the sea. It was melodic, layered. The same rhythm I'd heard in the forest, that slow, circular chant of children's voices rising and falling in time. I turned off the engine. The sound grew louder. The chanting wasn't coming from the woods this time. It was coming from the beach below. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The wind was cold, carrying the sting of salt. I followed the faint path down to the sand, my light cutting through the fog until I saw them. 7 small figures standing in a circle near the tide line, their hands linked. Each wore a crown of cedar branches. The surf lapped at their bare feet, and though the waves washed over them, they didn't move. My voice caught in my throat. "Who are you?" They didn't answer. But slowly they turned toward me. Their eyes reflected the light in dull silver flashes. The one closest to me tilted its head, childlike, and in a voice as thin as wind through leaves, whispered, "He came back." Something inside me snapped. I ran. I don't remember climbing back up to the lot or slamming the van door shut, just the desperate sound of the lock clicking and my breath ragged in my throat. I turned the key. Nothing. Not even a sputter. Then I felt it. A vibration, low and rhythmic, pulsing through the floor of the van. When I looked up, the windshield fogged over from the outside. Slowly, faint shapes began to appear on the glass, circles drawn by invisible fingers, overlapping, repeating until the entire windshield was covered. I don't remember screaming, but I must have because my throat hurt when I woke up. It was morning. The sky outside was pale and clean, the beach empty. For a brief, dizzy moment, I thought I dreamed it all. Then I saw the footprints. Tiny, bare, leading from the van door all the way down to the shoreline. Each one pressed deep into the sand, ending where the water began. I left the park that morning, didn't even look back. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the road itself was shifting under me, that the forest wasn't receding but watching, trailing me just beyond the tree line. I ended up in Montesano, renting a small storage unit where I parked the van. I figured if I walked away, left it behind, maybe I could break whatever link tied me to those woods. I spent the next week in a cheap motel, trying to sleep, trying to convince myself I'd escaped. But sleep brought the same dream every night. Cedar branches swaying in circles above my head, the children's chant weaving around me, soft and rhythmic. On the seventh night, I woke to a sound I hadn't heard since that first night in Cedar Hollow. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the motel window. My breath froze in my chest. I turned my head slowly, afraid to see, afraid not to. The glass was dark, the parking lot beyond swallowed in fog. Then, through the condensation, I saw a shape, a small hand pressed flat against the window from the outside. The glass trembled once, then the hand withdrew, leaving behind 3 overlapping circles drawn in the fog. By morning, I was gone. I don't stay anywhere for long now. The van's still locked away in that unit, but sometimes I drive past it just to make sure it's still there. A few weeks ago, I finally worked up the courage to open it again. Everything was covered in a thin film of moisture, the air thick with the scent of cedar. On the floor, beneath the passenger seat, lay a bundle wrapped in burlap. Inside were 7 small wooden rings tied together with twine. It's strange how fear becomes something familiar when you live with it long enough. I've stopped trying to understand. Maybe I was chosen. Maybe I stumbled into a place I was never meant to find. But I know this much. The forest remembers. It marks what belongs to it. And once it has your name, it doesn't forget. I've thought about going back, about facing whatever's waiting in that clearing. Not to fight it, just to end the wondering. To see the truth with my own eyes. But then I remember the look in those children's faces, the way their eyes caught the light like mirrors. I think about how they moved in perfect circles, how the forest around them hummed with something alive and ancient. It wasn't evil, it was ritual, a pattern that never ended. Sometimes late at night, I still hear the tapping. When I do, I light a candle and whisper a simple prayer, not to any god I know, but to the cedar trees themselves. If they took those children once, maybe they're still protecting them. Maybe they're just trying to find their way home. And maybe in their own way, they're warning the rest of us not to stray too deep into places that remember what we've forgotten. Ritual, reverence, fear. The last time I parked near a forest, I stood outside and listened. The wind moved through the branches like breath. I thought I heard laughter again, but this time I didn't run. I just closed my eyes and said, I remember. The wind stilled. The air warmed. For the first time in months, the scent of cedar faded. And I realized maybe that was the lesson all along, that some things don't want to haunt us. They just want to be remembered, to be acknowledged as part of the world we pretend isn't alive. Still, every time I see 3 rings, drawn in dust, etched in bark, or carved into memory, I feel that pull again, quiet and certain. The forest isn't done with me. It never is. I still remember the sound of the rain that night. Not soft or peaceful like you'd expect in the Pacific Northwest, but sharp, metallic, like it was striking something hollow. It clattered on the roof of my RV in a rhythm that didn't quite match the wind, almost as if the weather itself was keeping time with something else out there. That was the first night I learned that some roads aren't meant to be traveled anymore, not because of bad pavement, but because of what they lead you to remember. My name's Luke Bennett. I'm 39, born and raised in Washington, and I've been living on the road full-time for the last 5 years. What started as a dream of freedom turned into something much stranger, a test of how much silence, solitude, and uncertainty a person can handle before the mind starts whispering back. I'd been through Oregon, up through the Cascades, and all the way to the rain-shadow valleys of British Columbia. But it was that one forgotten route, the old logging road off Highway 101 near Forks, that changed the way I see the road itself. I'd heard about it from another RVer, an older guy named Phil, who I met outside a rest stop near Astoria. He told me about an abandoned route that used to connect small timber camps in the 1960s. The kind of road you won't find on GPS anymore, he said, because landslides wiped parts of it away. But he swore that if I could follow it far enough, I'd find a ridge where you could see the ocean and the mountains at once. The last perfect view in Washington, he called it. That kind of story hooks a person like me. I don't chase thrills, I chase solitude. The quiet, the kind that only lives where cell service dies and the map turns gray. But I've learned that when a place gets erased from the map, it's usually for a reason. I left early the next morning, my RV tires humming against wet asphalt until I hit gravel. The forest thickened fast, moss-draped trees closing in, the air smelling like rot and rain-soaked bark. The road narrowed until the branches scraped my side mirrors. Every few hundred feet, an old sign leaned at a strange angle, half-eaten by moss. Authorized personnel only. No through traffic. The kind of warnings that aren't loud enough to turn you around, just quiet enough to make you think twice. By the time I realized I hadn't passed another vehicle in over 2 hours, it was too late to turn back. The road behind me had turned into a slick ribbon of mud, sloped downhill in a way that made reversing impossible without risking a slide. The sky darkened prematurely, that heavy, pregnant gray that feels like it's lowering toward you. I found a wider shoulder near what looked like an old service turnout and parked for the night. When you live out of an RV long enough, you get used to strange noises, the metal expanding, the wind catching vents, even small animals brushing against the undercarriage. But that night was different. I'd barely killed the engine when I heard it, a faint, rhythmic thump beneath the floor, like someone gently knocking from below. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more, then silence. I stepped outside with my flashlight, rain misting into my face. The ground was soft, littered with pine needles and waterlogged branches. I crouched low and checked the undercarriage. Nothing. No animal, no branch, nothing that could have made that sound. But the mud beneath the RV looked disturbed, like it had been pushed upward from underneath, small bubbles breaking through the surface. I told myself it was just ground pressure, maybe a water pocket shifting from all the rain. You tell yourself things like that when you're alone in a forest that feels too old, too quiet. I went back inside, locked the door, and tried to distract myself with a book, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't parked where I thought I was. At some point during the night, I woke up to a sound that made every hair on my neck stand up, my tires crunching against gravel. Except I hadn't moved the vehicle. I sat upright, frozen. The RV was rolling, just barely, but enough for me to feel it. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the parking brake, but it was still engaged. The engine was off. My first thought was a landslide, but when I stepped outside again, the rain had stopped. The air was perfectly still. I pointed my flashlight around, sweeping the trees. The beam cut through mist and shadows. That's when I noticed something strange. Faint depressions in the mud leading from the trees toward my RV. Not boot prints, not animal tracks, just deep, uneven impressions, as if something heavy had dragged itself forward. The next morning, the forest looked different, brighter, calmer, almost pretending nothing had happened. But the ground beneath the RV was worse, sunk several inches lower, the mud forming a shallow depression exactly where I'd parked. I fired up the engine half ready to leave, but part of me needed to know where the road ended. That need, that stupid, stubborn need to see what others turned away from, is what drives people like me. As I continued north, the road turned rougher. Fallen branches, washed out sections, potholes deep enough to swallow a tire. I passed a rusted sign barely legible beneath the lichen, Camp Ellensbrook, 2 miles. That name stirred something. I'd heard it before, maybe from an old travel forum, stories about a ghost town that used to house loggers and their families. Supposedly abandoned in the late 70s after a flood wiped out the bridge connecting it to the main highway. Something about it called to me. Maybe it was the idea of seeing what nature does when it's left alone. Or maybe it was just morbid curiosity. The same instinct that makes you stare too long at a dark tunnel. I followed the sign. After about a mile, the trees opened slightly, revealing remnants of structures, wooden frames, collapsed roofs, and skeletal chimneys jutting out of moss. It wasn't a town anymore, just a graveyard of timber and memory. I parked the RV near what looked like an old general store and stepped outside. The silence was unnerving. Even the usual forest noises, wind, insects, birds, seemed absent. It was the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, makes you aware of your own heartbeat. I walked around, flashlight in hand, and noticed carvings on one of the remaining posts. Letters. Faded, but clear enough to read. Turn back when the ground breathes. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to decide if it was some local superstition or just graffiti from another explorer. But deep down, I already knew what it meant. Because the night before, under my RV, the ground had moved, and whatever lived beneath these abandoned roads wasn't done breathing yet. I should have turned around right then. Every instinct told me to. Every muscle in my body wanted to. But there's something strange about the kind of solitude that lives out here. It doesn't just scare you, it pulls you in. It makes you believe that the forest is testing you, asking if you'll keep going when no one's watching. So I did what I always do when fear starts whispering. I rationalized it. Told myself the carvings were old jokes, relics from bored loggers. Told myself the breathing ground was just the rainwater shifting the soil beneath rotted roots. I got back in the RV, started the engine, and drove further into Ellensbrook. The road narrowed to little more than a track through mud and moss. Branches scraped against the windshield like fingernails. The sunlight barely reached the forest floor now, replaced by that dim, greenish light that feels filtered through water. The remnants of the camp appeared in fragments, a rusted pickup bed half buried in ferns, a child's swing set tangled in ivy, a row of rotted cabins sagging into themselves. It was as if the entire place had taken one deep breath 50 years ago and never exhaled. I parked beside what used to be the mess hall and stepped out again. The air felt thick, humid, heavy with the smell of wet wood and metal. That's when I heard it again, the thump, not from beneath the RV itself, a slow, rhythmic pulse that seemed to move through the ground, faint at first but undeniable. I crouched, pressing my palm to the mud. It trembled, just barely, a steady breathing motion. I felt the same cold panic crawl through my chest that I'd felt the night before. But this time it wasn't confusion, it was recognition. I stepped back toward the RV, trying to convince myself it was groundwater, maybe a hidden spring below. But then I noticed the trees swaying, not in unison with the wind, but in time with the pulse. A low groan rippled through the trunks like wood straining under pressure. And somewhere beyond the trees, deeper in the camp, I heard something else, a voice. It wasn't clear at first, more like syllables broken by distance. A man's voice, low and deliberate. It echoed through the fog like it was caught between the trees. Don't dig. I froze. The sound didn't come from ahead. It came from the right, near one of the collapsed cabins. Against every rational thought I had, I moved closer, boots sinking into the mud. The structure was barely standing. The roof sagged inward, but the doorframe was still intact. I shined my flashlight inside. There were footprints. Fresh ones. I felt my pulse climb into my throat. The prints were human, barefoot, leading to the far corner where the dirt floor had caved slightly inward. I crouched beside them. The soil there was darker, wetter, and still shifting. Something was pushing from beneath, slow and deliberate. That's when my flashlight flickered. The beam wavered, and for one brief second before it went out, I saw it, a pale hand breaking through the mud. Thin, almost translucent, the fingers twitching weakly before sinking back down. I stumbled backwards so fast I hit the doorframe. The flashlight hit the ground, rolled, and came back on, its beam cutting across the cabin floor. The hand was gone. The hole was smooth again, as if it had never been disturbed. That was enough. I ran back to the RV, slammed the door, and locked it. My breath came in sharp bursts, the kind that fogs up glass fast. My mind fought to stay rational, to find an explanation, old bones shifting, a hallucination, light tricking my eyes, anything. But then I noticed the condensation on the inside of the windshield forming patterns, circles, 3 perfect rings drawn by something wet. And from beneath the RV, that same gentle knocking began again. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the driver's seat with the headlights pointed toward the woods, the engine running just in case. Every few minutes I'd see movement, not full shapes, just motion, like the trees themselves were leaning, repositioning, closing in. The rain started again near midnight, tapping hard on the roof, drowning out everything else. Sometime around 3 a.m., I must have dozed off. When I woke up, the rain had stopped. The engine was still idling, but the windshield was different. The fog had cleared in the middle, wiped from the outside like someone had dragged a finger across the glass. 4 words were written there, backward, visible from inside. It's still under you. I can't describe the sound that came out of me then. It wasn't a scream. It was lower, like a sound made only when something inside your chest finally breaks. I threw the RV into reverse, tires spinning in the mud until they caught. The vehicle jolted back hard, bouncing over something solid. For one horrifying moment, the undercarriage scraped like it had passed over a log or a rib cage. I didn't stop driving. I kept going until the trees thinned, the sky reappeared, and the first sliver of morning light touched the windshield. I finally pulled over at a small clearing by a washed-out bridge. The river below was swollen, rushing brown water over rocks. I stepped out, hands trembling so hard I could barely keep hold of my flashlight. When I crouched to check the underside of the RV, I saw something stuck to the mudguard. A small, waterlogged scrap of fabric, checkered flannel. It looked decades old, ripped clean off something larger. I didn't touch it. I just stared. That's when I realized where I was. The collapsed bridge below me wasn't just any crossing. It was the one that supposedly isolated Ellensbrook, the same one that washed away in the late 70s. Except, according to every map I'd ever seen, it was supposed to be miles behind me. Somehow, without turning, I'd crossed back to the same side I'd entered from. The forest had looped me. The GPS flickered to life for a moment before freezing. The blue route line twisted into a spiral, looping endlessly back to the same point. My coordinates, my exact position. I stared at it until the screen went black again. The quiet returned. The kind of quiet that doesn't mean peace. It means something is waiting. Watching to see if you'll try again. I remember sitting there, watching mist crawl over the treetops, realizing the most terrifying thing wasn't that I'd seen something impossible. It was that part of me wanted to go back, to see if the hand would rise again, to know what was beneath that breathing ground. That's the curse of roads like these. They don't end, they repeat. And the more you drive them, the less you belong anywhere else. I left that place by following instinct, not direction. Turned when it felt right, not when GPS told me to. Hours later, I saw the highway sign, US 101, 14 miles. Civilization. But when I checked the odometer, it hadn't moved. Not 1 mile since Ellensbrook. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I just felt watched, because in the rearview mirror, on the muddy trail behind my RV, I could still see it, faint but clear in the sunlight. A set of deep, uneven impressions, following the same tire tracks all the way back toward the trees. Something had followed me out. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself that what happened back there could be explained away. Fatigue, weather, isolation. It was just another one of those road ghost stories that come alive when your brain gets starved for human voices. But deep down, something was wrong. I felt it every time I turned off the ignition. The forest had followed me home. Even after I got back to the main highway and into a town, Port Angeles, I think, the feeling didn't fade. I parked at a small RV park near the marina where the sound of gulls and the distant hum of traffic should have been comforting. But the air still felt wrong. Heavy, like the air in that forest clearing. The rain didn't fall straight here either. It swirled as if something invisible was still moving through it. The owner of the park, a wiry guy in his 60s named Carl, noticed I looked like hell. "Long trip?" he asked, handing me the site map. I nodded. "Old logging roads," I said. He smirked, shaking his head. "You people never learn. Every few years, someone tries to go up those abandoned ones again. Comes back looking like they've seen something that didn't want to be seen. I asked him if he'd ever heard of Ellensbrook. His smile dropped instantly. You mean the camp? Don't go spreading that name around here, friend. Locals don't like talking about it. That only made me more curious. I pressed. Why not? Carl glanced toward the trees beyond the RV park fence. Because it's not gone. It's still sinking. My granddad worked the timber runs out there. He said the ground went soft one spring, swallowed an entire crew, equipment and all. They found one truck half buried, the driver inside it, like he'd been trapped for days before the soil sealed over. But that was the strange part. The man's eyes were open, and there were scratch marks on the roof of the cab, like he'd been trying to climb down, not up. He didn't need to say more. The look in his eyes told me the rest. That night, I stayed parked in the lot, engine off, just trying to breathe normally again. The rain came back after midnight, soft and persistent. I sat there watching it beat on the windshield when I saw something that made my stomach turn. The condensation began to form again. Not random this time. Perfect circles, just like before. 3 rings. I wiped them away, heart pounding, but they reappeared seconds later, this time lower, closer to the bottom of the glass. I stared at them, trying to understand if it was just heat from my breath, some coincidence. And then from outside, something pressed lightly against the glass. Not a full hand, just fingertips. 5 of them. Slowly tracing upward, leaving wet trails that stopped just short of where my eyes met theirs. I jumped back and started the RV instantly, headlights bursting to life and slicing through the rain. Nothing stood there. Nothing visible, at least. But there were footprints in the gravel, fresh ones, bare, leading right up to the driver's door. I didn't stay the night. I drove out of that town, up toward the Olympic Peninsula, hoping that putting miles between me and Ellensbrook would somehow reset whatever had started. But the truth is, there's no outrunning something that doesn't travel by road. By morning, I pulled over at a scenic turnout overlooking Lake Crescent. It was quiet, beautiful, sunlight filtering through the mist. For the first time in days, I felt calm enough to make coffee, to breathe without feeling like the air was listening. I sat by the open door, just watching the ripples on the lake. Then I noticed them. The ripples weren't random. They were pulsing in a steady rhythm, the same rhythm as the knocking. 3 waves. Pause. 3 more. I turned off the propane stove, stood up, and stepped closer to the shore. The air was cold, and the reflection of the forest shimmered dark green on the surface. I crouched, listening. The sound wasn't coming from the water. It was coming from below it. Like something deep under the lake bed was moving, breathing. A bird screeched suddenly overhead, a sharp, guttural sound, and I nearly lost my balance. When I looked up, I saw a shape on the opposite bank, a figure standing just at the tree line. I squinted through the morning haze. It looked human, motionless, tall. But what froze me was the shirt, the same checkered flannel I'd seen stuck beneath my RV. I blinked, and the figure was gone. That's when I realized I'd been hearing it faintly for minutes without noticing. A low rumble, deep enough to feel in my bones. The ground beneath me shifted. The lake's surface quivered, rippling outward in expanding rings. I stumbled backward, running toward the RV as the earth near the shore began to sag. By the time I reached the door, the ground gave a long, drawn-out exhale, a rush of cold air rising from beneath the soil. The smell hit me instantly. Wet stone, decay, and something metallic, like rusted iron. It wasn't natural. I slammed the door and started the engine again, heart hammering. Through the side mirror, I saw the depression spreading along the lakeshore, as if the ground itself was inhaling again, pulling something back down. I didn't stop driving until I reached the main highway again, and even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that the air inside the RV had changed. The moisture on the walls, the faint smell of mud, all of it followed me. That night, I parked behind a gas station outside Sequim, just long enough to rest my eyes. But when I woke up, the entire windshield was fogged again. Except this time, words were scrawled across it. Why did you leave? I stared at the message, until the letters began to drip, streaking down the glass like tears. I started the RV again, but the lights flickered, dimming one by one until I was left in near darkness. Somewhere outside, something brushed against the side of the vehicle. A scraping sound, slow and deliberate, circling me. Then came the thumping, louder this time from multiple points underneath. I could feel it in the soles of my feet. The ground was breathing again. I floored it, headlights cutting through darkness, gravel spraying from the tires. The road curved tightly between walls of trees, the rain blurring everything into gray streaks. I must have driven for an hour before I saw a sign for a campground, Salt Creek Recreation Area, 2 miles, and turned in without thinking. It was empty. Off-season, probably. I parked near a cliff that overlooked the Pacific and killed the engine. The ocean below was black, only visible when the lightning flashed. I stood outside, breathing the salt air, trying to convince myself that being by the sea meant safety, that whatever was in those woods couldn't cross this far. But then I realized something I wish I hadn't. The rhythm of the waves below, they weren't random either. They moved in the same pattern. 3 crashes, pause, 3 more, the same pulse, the same breath. I sank to my knees right there, staring out at the ocean, realizing that the Pacific Northwest wasn't haunted by ghosts or myths. It was haunted by the land itself, by the memory of everything buried beneath it. Timber camps, logging roads, whole towns swallowed by their own ground. And now, me, another traveler who had seen too much to go back to pretending the wilderness was just nature. You survive out here by respecting the silence, not breaking it. Because once the forest knows your voice, it remembers it. And when it breathes, it calls you back by name. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, the hum of the Pacific beneath me, the wind clawing through the trees above. The waves kept their rhythm. 3 crashes, pause, 3 more, like the ocean itself was breathing in time with the forest. I thought maybe if I just waited for dawn, it would stop. That whatever had followed me out of Ellensbrook would lose its hold in daylight. But the sun never really rose the next morning. The fog was too thick. It turned the world into a colorless blur, where sea and sky blended into one endless gray. Around 6, I stepped outside to check the ground. It was soft and wet beneath my boots, normal for a coastal site. But as I walked toward the cliff, something caught my attention. The tire tracks behind my RV weren't mine. They curved in from the opposite direction. There was no other vehicle around. I followed the tracks for maybe 20 feet before they just ended. Not in mud, not in sand. They simply stopped mid-path, as if the vehicle that made them had vanished. The rain had already begun to erase them, but the impression they left behind was enough to make my stomach twist. I felt like I was standing where someone else had been, maybe even me, in another version of the same night. I went back inside and started the engine, but the dashboard lights flickered again, weak and fading. I tapped the fuel gauge, half full, same as before. Everything looked fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right inside the RV. The air smelled like damp soil again, like something buried was now breathing beside me. I turned on the radio, hoping for static, anything human. But instead I heard it, that same low-frequency hum I'd felt in the ground days ago, faint but pulsing, a heartbeat. I switched stations, AM, FM, all of them. The hum stayed on every channel, and then a voice slipped through the distortion. Luke. Just one word. Drawn out, deep, distorted, but unmistakable. My name. The radio clicked off on its own. The silence that followed was unbearable, thick enough that it pressed on my ears. I sat there staring at my own reflection in the dark windshield, waiting for something to happen. And then the fog outside shifted. It didn't clear. It moved. It rolled up the cliff in smooth, deliberate folds, wrapping around the trees, spilling over the hood of my RV like a slow tide. The condensation on the glass formed instantly, 3 perfect circles again. Then 5 lines below them like fingers pressing from the outside. I threw the RV in reverse, tires spinning, and turned sharply toward the main road. But as I looked in the side mirror, I saw them. Figures, not solid, not human. Dark silhouettes standing just at the edge of the fog, unmoving, watching. I couldn't make out faces, only outlines, the way you see people behind frosted glass, and one of them was wearing that same flannel shirt. My chest tightened, my breath came fast, ragged. I accelerated until I hit asphalt again, the forest giving way to open coastal highway. But even there in the rearview mirror, the fog kept up, chasing, bending around the turns, following like it had a will. It took me hours to reach Port Townsend, where I finally saw other people. Joggers, cars, light. Civilization. I pulled into a parking lot overlooking the ferry terminal and shut off the engine. The silence felt almost unreal. The fog didn't follow me here. The world looked normal again. I told myself it was over, that I'd escaped whatever haunted those roads. But later, when I stepped outside to stretch my legs, I saw something stuck in the tread of my rear tire, a small piece of wood, splintered and soaked. I pried it loose and recognized it instantly, a section of carved post, letters barely visible under the grime. Turn back when the ground breathes. The same message from Ellensbrook. I dropped it instantly. It landed in the gutter, and the moment it touched the water, the rain started again, sudden, heavy, and immediate. The smell of earth returned, thick and suffocating. The storm rolled in faster than any I'd ever seen. That night I checked into a motel, the first one I'd stayed in for months. I couldn't stand being in the RV anymore. I left it parked under a streetlight, the engine cold, the rain washing over it. Inside the room, I tried to shower, to eat, to pretend I was normal again. But when I came back to the window, the condensation was there, inside the glass this time. And in it, written backward, I could read 3 new words. You still here. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Because when I closed my eyes, I could still hear that low hum. The ground, the forest, the water, all breathing together. Like the whole Pacific Northwest was alive beneath its own soil, like everything that's been buried there was waiting for someone to listen. And I had listened. When I finally worked up the courage to leave the next morning, I walked outside and froze. My RV door was open, not wide, just enough for rain to slip inside. I approached slowly, heart hammering, and saw mud smeared along the step. Bare footprints. Inside, the air was cold, wet, silent. My flashlight beam shook as I swept it across the floor. Everything looked undisturbed until I reached the table. Carved into the wood was a single phrase, drive until you stop hearing it. I stared at those words for what felt like hours. It wasn't a threat, it was a command, maybe even advice. I don't know. But I followed it. I left Washington that same day, crossed Oregon, then Idaho, then down into Nevada, as far from the mist and moss as I could go. And yet some nights, when I park in the desert and the wind dies completely, I swear I can still hear it. That soft, slow pulse beneath the wheels. That distant, impossible breath. Maybe the truth is simpler than I want it to be. Maybe those abandoned roads were never haunted by the dead. Maybe they're haunted by everything that lived too long. The earth remembers what we take from it, what we bury in it. And when you spend enough time alone out here, you learn that the ground itself can whisper back. I still live in my RV, I still drive, but I never let the tires rest on the same soil for too long, and I never, ever park when it rains, because when the rain hits metal just right, it sounds like breathing, and sometimes I hear it say my name. I still remember the color of the water that night, not black, not blue, but something deeper, like a bruise beneath glass. Waldo Lake is one of those places that feels too still for how vast it is. It's said to be one of the clearest lakes in North America. On a calm night, you can see 50 feet down. Locals say you can even see the moon's reflection so clearly that it feels like you're looking through to another sky below the waterline. A second sky. That's where the story starts. Out there beneath a full moon, when I thought I understood what silence was. My name's Aaron. I'm 42 now, but this happened back when I was 34, when I'd just gotten my first RV, a beat-up 1997 Fleetwood Bounder I'd bought from a retired couple in Eugene. They called it the Wanderer, and it had the smell of old pine cleaner and propane. I wasn't what you'd call a seasoned camper then. I worked long hours in tech support, mostly remote, and the RV was my way of breaking out of the box I'd built around myself. I thought being near nature would make me feel grounded again, less artificial. I didn't realize that solitude could also be a mirror you can't look away from. I parked at North Waldo Campground, just a few miles off the main forest road. It was late September, off-season, so there were only 2 or 3 other rigs scattered across the loop. The nights dropped below freezing, and the mornings came up pale and brittle. But I liked that kind of quiet. I liked that I could step out with my coffee and hear nothing but my own breath and the occasional creak of the trees as they adjusted to the cold. On my second night there, something strange started happening with the lake. I'd been sitting outside under a wool blanket watching the moon climb above the ridgeline. It was so bright that it turned the entire lake silver. You could see the reflection of every star, sharp and perfect, as if you were standing between 2 skies. Then I noticed something odd. Ripples, subtle but spreading outward from a single point near the center of the water. It was as if something large had disturbed the surface, but the lake is deep, over 400 feet, and swimming is almost impossible that time of year. I told myself it was probably a submerged log rolling over. When I went to bed that night, the wind had picked up. The RV shuddered softly with every gust. I remember lying there listening to the way the wind moved through the trees. It didn't whistle. It breathed, like air being drawn through lungs. Then, sometime past midnight, I heard something different. A single dull knock against the side of the RV. Not the sound of a branch, not random. It was too deliberate. 3 seconds passed, then another knock. I got up, pulled on my jacket, and stepped outside. The cold hit me like static. I walked around the rig with a flashlight, expecting maybe a branch had fallen or an animal had brushed past. But there was nothing. The trees stood motionless. The lake glimmered in the distance, undisturbed now, the moon's reflection perfectly still. That was when I saw something near the shoreline, a small light, faint and flickering, like the glow of a lantern or a phone screen. It was moving slowly along the water's edge, heading north toward the deeper part of the lake. At first, I thought it might be another camper, maybe out for a walk or fishing, but the campground was practically empty. I watched it for a while, maybe a minute, before it blinked out completely, like someone had pinched it shut. The next morning, I asked the camp host if anyone had come in late that night. She said no. In fact, she hadn't seen a single new arrival in 3 days. That was the first moment I felt something stir in me, a kind of unease that wasn't about what I'd seen, but about what I couldn't explain. That evening, I took my kayak out. Waldo's famous for its clarity, but out in the middle of the lake, it's like paddling across a sheet of glass suspended over a void. You can see rocks and fallen trees 40 feet below, but then the bottom drops away into nothing. It's a kind of beauty that turns on you if you stare too long. I paddled toward where I'd seen the light the night before. There was a small inlet there, almost hidden by reeds, and floating near it was something that made me stop paddling, a piece of old wood about the size of a door, burned around the edges. I used the paddle to push it aside, and that's when I saw something carved into it, a circle, with a smaller circle beneath it and a line connecting them, like a crude drawing of 2 moons. That symbol stayed in my head all evening. When I returned to camp, I noticed something else. The knocks were back. This time, softer, more rhythmic, as if someone was knocking from inside the RV itself. I checked the cabinets, the pipes, even the propane tank, thinking maybe it was expanding in the cold, but the sound didn't stop. I sat there, motionless, until it faded into nothing. By the 3rd night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound seemed amplified, the creak of the walls, the hum of the heater, the faint lap of water against the distant shore. Around 2 a.m., I went outside again. The air was so cold it felt like it might snap. The moon hung lower that night, larger somehow, and the reflection on the lake looked wrong. It wasn't matching the movement of the real moon anymore. When clouds drifted across the sky, the reflection stayed clear. I remember whispering out loud, "That's not possible." But it didn't care about what was possible. It just hung there, glowing beneath the surface like an eye opening in the deep. Then I heard the voice, not loud, not even distinct, just a low murmur that came from across the water. I couldn't make out the words, but it was human, or close enough to make my stomach turn. I took us closer to the edge, my boots crunching on frost. The voice seemed to shift in tone. The voice seemed to shift in me, like the sound was traveling through the air and using my chest as a resonator. And then, just like that, the moon beneath the lake began to ripple. Something was rising, slow, circular waves spreading outward from a single point. I shone my flashlight, but the beam died almost instantly, swallowed by the reflection. That's when I turned and ran back to the RV. I didn't even look behind me. Inside, I locked the door and killed the lights. My heart felt like it was trying to tear its way out. I sat there in the dark, listening. The knocks didn't come that night, just a soft, low vibration through the floor, like the earth itself was breathing. By dawn, I'd convinced myself I'd imagined most of it. The human mind does strange things when it's deprived of sound and company. I told myself that. I made coffee, tried to focus on something tangible, the smell of it, the warmth. But when I stepped outside, I saw something that broke whatever comfort I'd rebuilt. Near the shore, drawn into the frost by a finger or a stick, was that same symbol, the two moons connected by a line. And below it, scrawled faintly, almost erased by wind, were 3 words, "Second sky waits." I stood there staring at that message for a long time, coffee cooling in my hand, the steam twisting into the cold morning air like something alive. The letters were crude, uneven, not something you'd see from a hiker or a kid fooling around. They were pressed deep, as if whoever made them did so slowly, deliberately, almost reverently. I looked around, scanning the shoreline, the tree line, even the dirt around my RV. No footprints, just the scrawl in the frost and the silence of the forest holding it in place. I scraped it away with my boot, but the impression stayed visible in the thin layer of ice beneath, like the message had burned itself into the ground. I told myself it was a prank, maybe the camp host messing with me, but deep down, I didn't believe it. The handwriting was too strange, the phrasing too uncanny. Second sky waits. What did that even mean? By mid-afternoon, a fog began to roll across the lake. Not unusual for Waldo, but this fog was thicker than I'd ever seen. It came crawling through the trees, slow and heavy, muffling everything. You could barely see 5 feet ahead. I sat in the RV, engine idling, trying to decide whether I should pack up and leave. But something about the fog felt wrong. I'd driven in heavy fog before. This wasn't like that. The air inside the RV started to smell metallic, like old blood or iron, even though every window was shut tight. I remember wiping the condensation off the windshield and catching a glimpse of my own reflection. Pale, eyes wide, like I didn't recognize myself for a second. I told myself I was just tired. I'd barely slept in 2 days. But that evening, as the fog thickened, I began to hear the water again. Not the usual gentle lap of waves, something deeper, more rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the lake itself. It came in slow pulses that seemed to vibrate through the ground and up into the frame of the RV. I tried to ignore it, turned on some music, even called a friend back in Bend, but the signal was dead. No bars, no static, nothing. Around 9, I saw the light again, the same faint, wandering glow moving along the shoreline. This time closer. I shut off the interior lights and watched through the blinds. The light drifted through the fog like it was swimming, weaving between the trees. Then I saw another one appear beside it, and another. 3 in total, all moving in the same slow, deliberate line toward the water. I could see their reflections rippling beneath them, but those reflections didn't move right. They weren't mirrored. They seemed delayed, lagging behind the motion of the real lights, like echoes. Something in me wanted to see more. Not out of bravery, but that awful curiosity that sometimes hits when you're already afraid. I slipped on my boots, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped outside. The air was thick enough to taste. The beam from my flashlight barely cut through it. I followed the faint glow toward the lake, careful not to make noise. As I got closer, the lights stopped moving. They hovered, perfectly still, about 20 feet from shore. Then, one by one, they dipped downward, there, sinking through the mist until only their reflections remained, 3 bright points in the water. And then the water went black. Not dark, black, like the reflection of the sky had vanished entirely. I crouched down at the edge, trying to see, but the surface looked like oil. I reached out instinctively, not to touch it, but to test how close it was. That's when I noticed there were ripples spreading outward again. Slow, steady, like something was rising up to meet me. I backed away, stumbling, and when I turned, I saw a figure standing by the tree line. No light, no sound, just the shape of a person, tall and narrow, the edges of their body blurred by the fog. I called out, thinking maybe it was the camp host or another camper, but they didn't move. They just stood there, head slightly tilted, like they were studying me. My throat went dry. When I blinked, they were gone. I ran back to the RV, locked the door, and shut every curtain. My heart was beating so loud it felt like it might drown out everything else. I sat in the driver's seat, hand on the ignition, ready to leave, but the fog was so thick I couldn't even see the road. And then, faintly through the metal walls, came the sound I'd been dreading. 3. Slow, deliberate, exactly like before. I froze. They came again. I forced myself to move, grabbed the flashlight, turned toward the door, and shouted, "Who's there?" No answer, just the quiet hiss of the fog outside. I waited, muscles locked, and then I heard something even worse. The click of the handle. The door shifted slightly, like someone was testing the latch from outside. I lunged forward, bracing it with my shoulder, every nerve in my body firing at once. The handle jiggled again, harder this time. Then it stopped. I held my breath for what felt like an eternity. Slowly, the pressure on the door eased. When I finally dared to look through the side window, I saw nothing. Just fog, stretching out into emptiness. I thought maybe whoever it was had gone. I was wrong, because then I saw movement on the glass itself, condensation forming along the window like breath from the outside. But the shapes weren't random, they were fingers, 5 long streaks dragging downward, slow and precise from the top of the window to the bottom. I stumbled back, tripping over my boots, flashlight clattering to the floor. The streaks stopped halfway down, and for a moment the only sound was my own breathing. Then from somewhere behind the RV, faint, distant, came a voice. Low, almost melodic, like someone humming a lullaby. It drifted through the fog, rising and falling with that same eerie rhythm as the lake's pulse. I don't remember deciding to move, but suddenly I was in the driver's seat, turning the key, the engine coughing to life. I hit the headlights, but they only lit up a wall of white. I didn't care. I put it in drive and rolled forward, slow at first, then faster, following the gravel road by memory. The trees closed in on both sides, their trunks flashing in and out of the fog like tall, silent sentinels. After maybe 10 minutes, the fog began to thin, and I got a faint outline of the main road ahead. Relief hit me like a physical wave. I glanced in the mirror and froze. The reflection of the lake was still there. In the rearview mirror, even though the lake was miles behind me now, I could see its surface. Still, glassy, with the reflection of the moon perfectly intact. Only this time, it wasn't the same moon above me. The reflection was darker, redder, pulsing faintly like an ember. And as I watched, it began to spread, widening across the surface until the entire reflection turned black. That's when the mirror cracked. A sharp, splitting sound, like glass under pressure, and a thin fracture ran down the center of the rearview mirror. I slammed on the brakes. The crack glowed faintly, a line of dull red light cutting through the glass. My stomach turned. When I finally looked back again, the reflection was gone. Just darkness. I drove the rest of the night without stopping, the RV rattling over every bump in the road. I didn't pull over until I saw the faint orange glow of a diner sign near Oak Ridge. The place was empty except for a trucker at the counter. I must have looked pale as hell because the waitress asked if I was okay before I even ordered. I told her I'd come from Waldo Lake. She froze mid-step, her expression changing. Then, softly, she said, "You were up there last night?" I nodded. She looked at the trucker, then back at me. "Honey," she said, "the lake's closed. They've been draining part of it all week. Something about contamination. Nobody's supposed to be camping there right now." I just stared at her, not understanding what she meant. "That can't be right," I said. "There were other rigs there, maybe 2 or 3 at least. A camp host, too." I talked to her. The waitress shook her head. "Honey, there hasn't been a host up there since Labor Day. They closed the loop after the first freeze. You must have been seeing something else." Something else. Those 2 words clung to me like frost on the inside of a windshield. I tried to argue, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. The trucker at the counter looked over his shoulder, his face pale beneath the yellow diner light. "You didn't hear anything out there, did you?" he asked quietly. I hesitated. "What do you mean?" He sighed and rubbed his hands together, his knuckles creaking. "My brother was a fire lookout up by Shadow Bay 20 years ago. Said sometimes on clear nights you could hear the lake hum, like a low electric tone just under hearing range. He swore it drove one of the rangers half mad. They found him sleepwalking out to the dock one night, whispering about the moon under the water." The waitress glared at him. "Don't start that again, Jack." But her voice cracked just a little when she said it. I finished my coffee and left a bill on the counter. When I stepped back outside, dawn was bleeding across the horizon, thin and gray. I stood there a moment, staring toward the east, toward the forest I'd just escaped. The fog was gone, but the air still carried that faint metallic scent, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. I drove straight home to Bend. I didn't stop to rest, didn't look in the mirrors more than I had to. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a long time, engine idling, afraid to turn it off, like the silence might bring something with it. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't focus on work. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that reflection. The red glow under the surface, the moon that wasn't the moon. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, isolation, maybe even carbon monoxide poisoning from the heater. But that didn't explain the mark in the frost. It didn't explain the knocks, the handprint on the glass, or the fact that someone or something knew how to draw that symbol. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of water dripping. Not from the ceiling, not from the pipes. It was coming from outside, right beneath my bedroom window. I live on the 2nd floor of a small duplex, no trees near the wall, no roof ledge where anything could collect. I got up, hesitated, then pulled the curtain back just enough to look, and there it was, a puddle. Small, dark, perfectly round, reflecting light that shouldn't have been there, moonlight. But the moon that night was behind heavy clouds. The puddle shimmered faintly, almost breathing. And in the middle of it, for just a second, I thought I saw the same 2 circles and the connecting line, the mark from the lake, forming in the ripples. Then it vanished. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the living room, all the lights on, replaying everything over and over. I thought about the phrase, "second sky waits." What if it wasn't a warning? What if it was an invitation? Over the following weeks, I started researching Waldo Lake. Old Forest Service records, historical maps, even native Klamath folklore. The name Waldo, it turns out, wasn't the original one. It was called Quilat once, meaning mirror water. There were stories, half recorded, half whispered, about a place beneath the surface, another reflection of the world where things lost above would sometimes reappear. Tools, boats, even people. Some said the water didn't just reflect what you saw, it reflected what you believed. One record from 1913 caught my attention. A ranger named Ben Wilcox who went missing while patrolling the northern shore. They found his canoe a week later, floating upright, untouched, with his lantern still lit. His journal was recovered inside a waterproof pouch. The last entry read, "Moon beneath brighter tonight. Can hear it now. It calls as if through the bones. second sky below, clearer than the first. That line sent a shiver through me. I printed it out, read it over and over. The phrasing matched what I'd seen drawn in the frost. It wasn't coincidence. It was continuity. I told myself I wouldn't go back there, but the thought wouldn't let go. The sound of the lake, the reflection that wasn't right, it felt unfinished, like the story hadn't let me leave. So a week later, against every instinct, I drove back. It was early November now, and the access road was barely passable. Snow rimmed the edges of the forest. The main gate was locked, but I parked on the shoulder and hiked the rest of the way in. The forest was quiet in that heavy, expectant way that makes you feel like you're walking through someone else's dream. When I reached the campground, it was empty. Tables dusted with frost, fire rings filled with rainwater. My old campsite looked untouched, except for one thing, a piece of wood lodged in the sand near the shoreline, burned around the edges. The same symbol carved into it again. I knelt down beside it, tracing the grooves with my glove. The carving looked newer, cleaner, as if it had been done recently. And beside it, something else caught my eye. A single boot print, half frozen in the mud. About my size. I stood up and looked toward the lake. The surface was perfectly still. No ripples, no reflection of clouds. Just a perfect mirror. The sky above was dull and overcast, but beneath the surface, beneath that impossible clarity, the moon was there again. Full and white, shining up from below, even though no moon hung above me. My breath froze midair. The phrase echoed in my head, "Second sky waits." I took a step closer, then another. The surface didn't break, even when I threw a pebble into it. It hit, rippled once, then vanished like it had been swallowed. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I don't know what made me do it. Curiosity, madness, something in between. But I took one more step, my boot barely touching the edge. The ice-thin surface shimmered, distorting the moon below. And in that distortion, I saw something else. A reflection that wasn't mine. It was standing beside me in the water's image, taller, thinner, its face hidden in shadow. But where its reflection should have ended, I could see movement, slow and deliberate, like it was breathing beneath the surface. I stumbled back, tripping on a root hard on the frozen ground. The reflection rippled, blurred, then stilled again. Only this time, the moon beneath was gone, replaced by darkness. And in that darkness, faint but clear, a pair of eyes opened. They were pale, almost silver, and they were looking straight up at me. I don't remember running. I don't remember reaching the road. I just remember the sound that followed, a low, endless hum that felt like it came from inside my chest. It didn't stop when I got back to the RV. It didn't stop when I reached the highway. It didn't stop for weeks. It still hasn't stopped. Some nights when the wind dies and the world feels too quiet, I hear it again. That slow vibration, like the breath of something ancient and patient waiting beneath the earth. And when I look out the window, sometimes I catch the faintest shimmer of light reflected on the glass. A second moon, always beneath, always waiting. I used to think camping was about escaping the noise of the world, finding peace in the quiet. Now I know better. Silence isn't peace. It's invitation. It's the space where something else begins to listen back. And I've learned that some reflections aren't meant to be trusted, because the sky above Waldo Lake isn't the only one watching. It always starts with something small, a flicker of movement beyond the porch light, a sound that shouldn't exist after midnight, the kind of noise that makes you freeze halfway through zipping your sleeping bag, not because you think it's dangerous, but because your body already knows it is. My name's Ethan Weller, and I've been living in my RV for the last 3 years. I film everything, back roads, forgotten campgrounds, and quiet slices of rural America where the stars look sharper than anywhere else. But when you live on the road long enough, you start to see a darker side of freedom. Every campground has a story. Every forest road holds something waiting, patient, unseen, and closer than you think. This story wasn't supposed to be mine. It started as a collection of messages from viewers. People who followed my RV channel sent me emails about weird things they'd seen near their homes. Most were harmless, stories of coyotes, weird echoes, or headlights that stayed parked too long down the road. But 3 messages, sent weeks apart from 3 different states, had one eerie thing in common. Each person said they'd heard someone breathing outside their RV, right next to their window, between 2 and 4 in the morning. No footprints, no camera evidence, just the breath. One viewer from Idaho wrote, open quote, "I could feel it fogging the glass. My wife swore she saw a shadow crouched beneath the window when the porch light came on, but the second I opened the door, nothing." Close quote, another from Oklahoma, open quote, "It followed us. We moved camp 3 times, same time of night, same rhythm, like a man trying not to breathe too loud." Close quote. By the time I read the 3rd message from a man in northern Arkansas, I'd already started connecting dots, the timestamps, the moon phases, the geography. Each of them had camped near a tree line within 20 feet of their RV. That detail was so consistent it felt rehearsed. I didn't believe it, not completely, but I was curious, so I drove out to where the last guy, a retired lineman named Mark, said it happened. It was late March, cool nights, soft wind, and the kind of silence that makes you feel like the woods are holding their breath while waiting. His place sat on the edge of a lake, a narrow clearing of pines with just enough room for a trailer, a picnic table, and the rusted frame of a swing set from the 80s. Mark met me halfway down the dirt road. Thin, pale man, maybe 60. He didn't smile when he waved me in. "You really want to see where it stood?" he asked. His voice was low, like he was already expecting it to hear him. We walked around the RV pad, tire marks still soft in the dirt. He pointed toward the back window near the propane hookup. "Right there. You can still see where the grass bent." He wasn't wrong. The patch beneath the window looked flattened, like someone had knelt there for a long time. "What'd you hear exactly?" I asked. "Not here," he said, rubbing his forearm like the memory hurt. "Felt. Like it was pressing its face to the glass, drawing in air real slow, like it was smelling me through it. I wanted to call it nerves, paranoia, but the thing about being alone in the wild, you learn how your instincts sharpen. If someone says they felt something that close, you don't argue. You listen. That night, I parked my RV in the same spot. I kept one camera aimed at the rear window and another on the forest edge. The lake reflected moonlight through the trees, silvery, still, perfect. It should have been peaceful. But there's something about camping where someone else once felt fear. It stains the air. By midnight, the woods had gone utterly quiet. Not calm, quiet. The kind of silence where the world seems to step aside. Even the frogs quit their chorus. I stayed up editing footage until 2:11 a.m. when I heard it. A breath, soft, slow, deep. It wasn't close at first, maybe 20 feet away, just beyond the pines. I muted my laptop and froze. The breath came again. Inhale, pause, exhale, like someone standing just out of sight, trying not to move too much. I grabbed my flashlight, switched it on, and aimed it toward the tree line. Nothing. No movement. The beam shook slightly in my hand, and I realized my heart was sinking with the rhythm of that breath, like my body had remembered it before my mind did. Then I heard it again, but this time it was inside the breath, a tiny whistle at the end, almost human, like when someone breathes through cracked lips. I turned on the RV porch light. Nothing stirred. I could see the flattened grass patch again, waving slightly in the wind, but there was no wind strong enough to carry sound like that. At 3:04, I heard a tap on the glass. Not a knock, just a soft touch, fingertip pressure, slow, deliberate. I moved to the back, careful not to step too loud, and pulled the curtain an inch to peek. There was no one there, but I swear, I could see the fog from a breath forming on the outside of the glass. Just a faint oval shape, right where a mouth would have been if someone stood there. I backed away, quietly turned on the camera monitor, and rewound the live feed. Static. The feed had frozen at 2:58 a.m. No recording after that. I sat down in the driver's seat, waiting for dawn. My eyes burned. My palms were slick with sweat. Every few minutes, I'd hear faint movement, like something dragging along the grass. Not footsteps, not animal weight, just the sound of friction. When the sun finally rose, I stepped out. The ground was damp with dew, and my shoes left clear prints in the mud. Right beneath the window, there were other prints, wide, sunken, almost like knees. But next to them, faintly overlapping, were something else. Small ovals, too narrow for hands, too rounded for paws. They looked like someone had pressed their face to the ground. I crouched there for a long time, staring at those imprints, face-sized dents in the soil, like someone had been laying there, listening through the ground. The dew hadn't even settled on them properly. They were fresh. I felt my stomach twist as the early sunlight hit the grass around the marks. There was a faint outline leading away from the window, a trail almost invisible unless you looked from the right angle. The blades of grass weren't broken or stepped on. They were leaning, as if something had moved through them without weight, dragging along the air itself. I followed it. The trail wound into the pines, past the swing set that groaned quietly in the breeze. That sound, metallic, hollow, made me feel like a kid again, walking into something I knew I shouldn't. The deeper I went, the colder it got. You know that kind of chill where the temperature doesn't make sense? Where you step from one patch of forest air into another and it feels like the oxygen's been pulled out of it? That's what it felt like, 10 feet in. I stopped when I saw the hollow. It wasn't a proper hole, more like a dip in the ground, perfectly round, maybe 5 feet across. Pine needles rimmed the edge like a woven nest. At the center, someone, or something, had placed a line of small objects. I remember every single one. A broken watch, a bird skull, a piece of glass shaped like a teardrop, and a bent RV key. My RV key. I dropped to my knees. I'd kept a spare under the bumper, the kind of lazy habit you think no one will ever notice. But the sight of it there, laid out in that circle, stopped my heart. It hadn't just taken the key, it had brought it here, to the woods. When I touched it, the air around me felt suddenly humid, like breath on my skin. I didn't wait. I ran back toward camp, every sound amplified, branches snapping, my boots sinking into the soil, my breath ragged. The RV came into view like a lighthouse in fog. I slammed the door behind me, locked it, and sat against it, trying to breathe. It took me a full minute to realize I was still holding the key. That night, I parked near the lake again, but this time I backed the RV right up against the water. No trees behind me, just open space and reflection. My instinct told me it didn't like open ground, that it preferred shadows, surfaces where it could hide and listen. I stayed up late again, reviewing the footage from before the feed had cut out. There wasn't much. But around 2:57 a.m., I caught a single frame before the static, a flicker of something pale between the trees. It wasn't a body, more like a thin shimmer, as if the air itself bent. And right before the feed froze, the window's reflection showed something I can't forget, the faint outline of a face pressed against the glass. No eyes, just an open mouth, breathing. I shut the laptop. The air outside was still. Even the lake didn't ripple. I thought about leaving that night, just pulling out, hitting the road until I saw streetlights again. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. It's the same instinct that keeps people watching a burning building, waiting to see what happens next. At 2:41 a.m., I heard it again, the breath. But this time, it didn't come from the window. It came from beneath the RV. A slow, dragging inhale, like someone lying flat under the chassis, trying to match their breathing to mine. I froze. My body tensed so hard, my fingers went numb. I tried not to move. The floor creaked under my feet, and the sound below shifted in response. It mirrored me. Every tiny movement I made, it copied, like it was learning. I dropped to my knees and pressed my ear against the floor. A faint vibration pulsed through the metal, steady and rhythmic. And then a soft hum, like something whispering without words. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and burst out the door, aiming it under the RV. Nothing. The dirt beneath was undisturbed, no footprints, no crawl marks, just the sound of my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. But when I turned around, something was waiting at the tree line. It wasn't standing. It wasn't even visible, not fully. Just a faint, shivering outline in the air, like heat distortion. I blinked, and it shimmered again, lower this time, closer to the ground. The sound started again, the breathing, now from multiple directions. Inhale, exhale, inhale. I backed up slowly toward the RV door, my flashlight beam catching movement near the ground, tall grass flattening and rising in patterns that made no sense, like something invisible was crawling toward me. I slammed the door, locked it, and started the engine. The headlights flickered once, twice, before catching. The whole RV trembled as I gunned it toward the main road. But something was wrong. The rearview camera flickered back on, unprompted. Through the static, I saw shapes moving behind me. Dozens of them. Not solid, not human. Just distortions in the air like breath hitting cold glass. They didn't chase. They followed, keeping their distance. By the time I reached the highway, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely steer. I didn't stop driving until the sun broke over the hills and the world felt warm again. The next day, I got a message on my phone. No number, no name, just a single line, open quote, "We can breathe where you sleep now," close quote. It took me hours to calm down enough to think rationally. Maybe someone hacked me. Maybe it was Mark, though I hadn't told him where I'd gone next. Still, I had to believe there was a human explanation. That's how you stay sane out here. But later that week, I uploaded my story, the footage, the sounds, everything. The video went viral overnight. Thousands of comments, most of them saying the same thing. Open quote, "I heard that same breathing behind my house last week." Close quote. One woman from Colorado sent me a clip from her backyard camera. You could hear the same sound, slow inhale, slow exhale, and her motion light turning on to reveal empty space. And then she said something that chilled me more than anything I'd experienced myself. Open quote. It's not just in the woods anymore, it's at the fence line. After that video, everything changed. My inbox became a confessional. People who'd never even gone camping wrote to me, describing the same thing, the breathing, the fog on glass, the unseen presence that seemed to inch closer each night. It wasn't just happening in forests anymore. It was happening in suburbs. One man from Montana said he'd woken up to find his dog barking at the sliding door, nose pressed to the glass, tail low and trembling. When he turned on the light, the fog on the door spelled out one word, "Stay." Another from Alabama said her son had started sleepwalking to the backyard at 3 a.m. every night, standing barefoot in the grass facing the tree line, whispering like he was listening to something. I didn't know what to do with the flood of messages. At first, I thought it was a strange collective hallucination, people scaring each other through suggestion. But then I got a voicemail that forced me to reconsider. The voice was familiar. It was Mark. He sounded out of breath, panicked. Open quote. "Ethan, I don't think it left when you did. I moved my trailer to a friend's property, but it's still here. It's quieter now, but sometimes I hear it under the floor. It's like it followed the dirt." Close quote. The message cut off mid-sentence. I tried calling back, but the line was dead. The next morning, I drove out to his location, a new spot about 50 miles from the lake. When I arrived, there was nothing but tire ruts, a collapsed awning, and his old swing set lying on its side. No trailer. No sign of Mark. I reported it, but the sheriff said he probably just sold the RV and moved on. "People disappear all the time out here," he said, leaning on his truck. "Doesn't mean something took them." But when I showed him the patch of grass where the dirt dipped, a perfect circular depression like something heavy had rested there, he stopped talking. His expression tightened. "Whatever made that," he muttered, "wasn't a man." That night, I parked at a KOA just off Route 70, trying to shake the feeling that something was still watching. I kept my blinds down, my lights low, and every noise made me flinch. Around 1 a.m., I heard the sound again, faint, rhythmic. Not the breath this time, but something lighter, like fingernails brushing metal. I turned on my phone camera and crept toward the sound. It was coming from the back of the RV near the water hookup. The tapping continued, patient, steady, as if someone was testing each inch of the siding. When I finally looked, there was nothing. Just a thin mist rolling off the grass lit by the amber glow of a distant floodlight. Then my phone buzzed. A new voicemail, unknown number, no transcription available. I pressed play. The audio was faint, just static at first, then that slow, unmistakable rhythm of breathing. But underneath it, barely audible, came a whisper. Open quote, "You brought it with you." Close quote. My hand went cold. The phone slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a hollow crack. I turned in circles, scanning every window, half expecting to see fog blooming against the glass again. Nothing, but the air inside felt wrong. Stale. Like it had already been breathed. By morning, I made a decision. I was done chasing stories. Whatever this thing was, myth, spirit, whatever name you wanted to give it, I didn't want it near me anymore. I drove west across Kansas through storms, through silence, through long highways that blurred into mirages of motion. Every few hours, I'd check the mirrors, not for cars, but for something else. Sometimes I'd see a shimmer of air behind me, moving against the wind. Sometimes it was gone before I could focus on it. I stopped talking to my audience for a while. I didn't want to feed the obsession, or maybe I didn't want to hear more proof that it was spreading. But the messages never stopped. One came from a young couple outside Reno. They'd camped in their backyard to test their new RV before a trip. Around 2:30 a.m., their carbon monoxide detector went off for no reason. The husband checked the sensors, all clear. Then he noticed condensation on the inside of the sealed window, forming in the shape of a face. They sent me the photo, and there, faint but visible, was a fog print, mouth open, eyes hollow. When I zoomed in, I realized something I'd missed before. The fog wasn't random. It followed a pattern, small indentations along the edge, almost like scars or ridges. It matched mine. I froze staring at it, the reflection of my own face on the screen overlapping perfectly with that print. My chest went tight. My skin broke into cold sweat. I felt like I was looking at something that already knew me. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about what it meant. That maybe what everyone was seeing wasn't coming from outside. Maybe it was an echo, something projected, shared, transmitted through fear itself. I remembered the phrase from the message, "We can breathe where you sleep now." What if that wasn't a threat? What if it was a truth? That once you'd felt it, once you'd listened, it didn't need to crawl through the forest anymore. It could just exist inside the silence you left behind. A week later, I parked my RV behind an old service station in Arizona, far from trees, far from people. I wanted to record one last video, not for clicks, not for proof, but as a warning. I turned on the camera and stared into the lens. "You think it's out there," I said, voice trembling. "You think it's something watching from the woods, from your yard, from the dark, but it's not. It's in the quiet itself, in the pause before you breathe, in the air between your thoughts. And once you hear it, it learns your rhythm." I hesitated, listening. The world outside was completely still. Then I whispered, "So whatever you do, don't listen too long." The light above me flickered once, then twice, and the sound began again, slow, measured from inside the RV. Inhale, exhale. Only this time, the rhythm wasn't mine. That night was the longest of my life. Every shadow inside me felt alive, stretching with the sound. I could hear it, not just breathing, but adjusting, like it was syncing itself, learning my pace, matching every inhale a heartbeat later. I tried to speak, to break the rhythm, but when I opened my mouth, no sound came out, only air. It was as if the space between my breath and its breath had disappeared. The camera light glowed faintly from the corner. It was still recording, red dot blinking. The footage would show everything. I thought that would give me courage. But when I looked at the small screen, the feed wasn't showing me. It was showing the empty passenger seat. The sound, though, the microphone was catching it clearly. Inhale, exhale, pause. Inhale. I whispered into the darkness, "Who are you?" No answer, but the breathing deepened. That's when I noticed the condensation. slow, steady, forming on the inside of the windshield. It spread in a widening oval, as though something invisible sat in the driver's seat. And then, in that fogged patch, a single handprint appeared. Palm wide, fingers too long, pressed flat against the glass. I stumbled backward, knocking over my camera tripod. The sound it made when it hit the floor didn't echo. It was swallowed, absorbed by the air. The breathing stopped, and then, softly, like the start of a storm, I heard whispering beneath the RV again. Not words, not even a voice, just air pushing through gaps in the metal like the earth itself was exhaling. I grabbed my keys, my jacket, anything I could reach, and bolted for the door. The second I opened it, everything fell silent. The air outside was colder than before, sharp with the smell of iron and rain, even though the sky was clear. My headlights glared against the sand of the Arizona lot, but the fog wasn't dispersing anymore. It hung low, rolling around my tires like a tide. That's when I saw them, shapes inside the mist, not solid, but distinct enough to count. 1, 2, 3, more, each one breathing in time. I ran. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I sprinted toward the service station. The building had long been abandoned, its windows boarded, its gas pumps skeletal with rust. But the door was open, a rectangle of blackness, as though inviting me in. I stopped before it. The silence pressed against me like a wall. That's when I heard my own voice. Open quote, Ethan. Close quote. It wasn't coming from inside. It was coming from the RV. I turned. The door I'd left open was now closed, but I could see the outline of someone sitting in the driver's seat. Silhouette against the windshield, hands on the wheel, my hands, my posture. For a second, I thought maybe it was a trick of reflection, but then it turned its head and looked directly at me. The fog on the glass shifted with its breath, and I realized it wasn't fog at all. It was condensation forming from the inside out. The thing had taken my seat. I didn't go back for the RV. I don't know how long I stood there, just watching that faint outline breathing where I should have been. Eventually, I walked until I reached the road. A passing trucker picked me up near dawn, said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. Maybe I had. For days I didn't sleep. I kept expecting to hear it again, the breathing, the whisper under the floor. But what I got was worse. Silence. A deep, complete silence that felt unnatural. Even my own breathing sounded wrong. I went to a motel outside Flagstaff, cheap and fluorescent. I didn't tell them my real name. I just needed a door with a lock that wasn't attached to an engine or wheels. When I finally lay down, I stared at the ceiling until my vision blurred. My chest rose and fell, slow, deliberate. Then around 3 a.m, I felt a pressure in my lungs, like I was inhaling someone else's air. My breath hitched. The sound echoed back, half a beat later. It was there too. Not outside this time, not under the bed or behind the curtain, inside the air itself, breathing through me. I remember whispering, "What do you want?" For the first time, it answered, open quote, "to be remembered." Close quote. The voice wasn't separate. It came from inside my chest, as though my breath had turned against me. I shot upright, gasping, stumbling toward the bathroom mirror. My reflection stared back, wild eyes, shaking hands, sweat shining in the dim light. But the glass began to fog, even though the air was cold. A face formed beside mine. Not mine. Not anyone's. Just the suggestion of one, smooth, featureless, but unmistakably alive. I threw open the window, gasping for real air, but it followed, seeping through the frame, settling against my skin like damp cloth. The world outside looked still, unaware. Streetlights hummed, crickets sang. Somewhere far away, a truck passed. But all of it felt disconnected, unreal. And that's when I understood what it had been doing all along. It wasn't haunting places. It was haunting breath itself. Every person who'd heard it, who'd stopped long enough to listen, became a vessel. It didn't need to chase anyone. It just needed to be heard once, deeply enough that your body remembered the rhythm. That's how it spreads. Through silence, through listening. It's been 8 months since then. I haven't gone back on the road. I sold the RV to a scrapyard outside Tucson, paid cash, told them not to bother contacting me again. But sometimes I see videos online, backyard recordings, doorbell cams, even baby monitors, with that same faint sound in the background. Inhale, exhale, pause. Every time I feel my lungs tighten, I tell myself it's just paranoia, just pattern recognition. But late at night, when I lie awake, I can feel it again. Not as fear now, but as presence. A pulse beneath my ribs, a shadow between breaths. And sometimes when I look out the motel window at the still night, I think I see fog gathering by the fence line, even when the air is dry. Sometimes I whisper to it, like an old friend. Still there? And it always answers, not in words, but in rhythm, slow, patient, familiar. Breathing with me, breathing through me. And if you're listening to this right now, if you've caught yourself holding your breath somewhere along the way, don't. Let it go. Because the second you try to listen for the sound I've been describing, the second you pause and truly open your ears to silence, it'll know exactly where you are. I don't know if what I heard that night came from the mountain or from me, but it's been 3 years, and the sound still comes back when everything else goes quiet. My name's Evan Cross. I'm 36, and I was camping alone near Mount Shasta, Northern California, an area known for its legends and its silences. People say the place hums differently. Some say it's the air currents, others say it's the mountain's magnetic field. But I'd grown up hiking those ridges, so to me it was just home, raw, unpredictable, but grounding. After years working construction in Redding, I'd bought a used Winnebago Brave, a 1989 model I'd been restoring slowly, piece by piece. It was supposed to be my way back to stillness. I set out that Friday with no plan except to reach a small clearing I used to know, about 6 miles up a forestry road west of the lake. The weather was mild for October, crisp mornings, warm afternoons, nights that bit at your skin just enough to remind you where you were. I remember the air smelling faintly metallic, like wet iron and pine. My plan was simple: 3 days off-grid, no phone, no noise, just campfire and quiet. The first day went easy. I parked the RV in a half-cleared area near a narrow stream surrounded by red fir and sugar pine. The ground was uneven, soft with needles, and the mountain loomed pale in the distance, its top disappearing into low clouds. I felt that old calm return, the kind that comes only when you step out of your own routines. I cooked beans and rice, set up a small lantern by the fire ring, and watched the sun drop behind the ridge. It was sometime after dusk that I heard it, a single echo that didn't belong. It sounded like wood striking wood, deep and slow, followed by its faint reflection farther off, a delayed, hollow answer from somewhere higher on the slope. At first I thought it was a tree cracking, or maybe an animal moving through brush, but then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. 3 steady hits, evenly spaced, as if made by someone who wanted to be heard. I froze by the fire. The mountain was known for its odd acoustics. Sound bounced strangely there, especially at night. I told myself it could have been anything. A hiker hammering tent stakes, a branch falling and echoing twice. But something about the rhythm felt intentional. I remember thinking it was strange that the second echo was softer, more drawn out, like the sound had traveled down a long hallway before coming back. The noise stopped after a few minutes. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, laughed a little at myself, and poured another cup of coffee. I've camped alone plenty of times, and the woods play tricks when you're tired. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the sound hadn't been random. Later that night, around midnight, the same pattern came again. 3 knocks, distant but clear. This time, they came from the opposite direction, closer to the stream. Then another set followed, farther away, answering like a mimic. The fire had burned low by then, and I remember the way the shadows stretched over the RV, the metal sides catching flashes of orange. I listened, heart pounding, and realized the rhythm wasn't just repeating. It was mirroring itself, as if something were responding in delay, copying what it heard. That's when the name came to me, Echo Cabin. It was a half-collapsed ranger structure about 2 miles from where I was parked. Locals said the Forest Service used it back in the 70s, before storms and neglect tore it apart. I'd hiked near it once years ago, seen the frame still standing under heavy moss. But what made it unsettling wasn't the decay. It was what the place was rumored for. People claimed that if you shouted there, the echo came back not quite the same. Slower, lower, like your own voice trying to warn you. By 2 a.m., fog had rolled down from the slopes. My lantern light scattered against it, making the clearing look smaller than it was. Every sound seemed closer, the stream gurgling like whispering voices, the trees popping in the cold. I shut off the lantern and sat still inside the RV, listening. Nothing moved. Then, faintly, a sound rose through the fog, not wood this time, but footsteps on wet leaves, slow and deliberate. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer, but the pattern was too steady and it stopped whenever I moved. When I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, the beam barely reached 10 feet. The fog was thick, almost tactile. I called out, "Hello?" my voice sounding smaller than I expected. A second later, my own voice came back from somewhere unseen, not as an echo, but as a repeat, drawn out, wrong in timing. "Hello." I swear it wasn't the same sound reflected. It had weight, tone, presence, like someone was repeating me just a half second too late. I went cold all over. I stood there for what felt like minutes, waiting for the mountain to explain itself, but nothing did. I backed toward the RV, locked the door, and sat awake the rest of the night with the generator off. No more knocks came, no more voices, just silence. When dawn came, the fog lifted and everything looked ordinary again. Pines swaying gently, water moving clear over stone. The sunlight made me doubt the entire night. I convinced myself it had been some strange acoustic illusion. Mount Shasta was full of them. Maybe the fog had bent the sound back at me. I laughed about it over breakfast, even sent a photo of the sunrise to my sister, telling her the trip was perfect so far. But that afternoon, while walking toward the stream, I found something that made my chest go tight. Near the waterline, just beneath a downed log, were boot prints. Not fresh, but not old either. The spacing was odd, uneven, as if whoever made them had been carrying weight or limping. They led from the direction of the slope, straight toward my camp, and stopped 5 feet from my fire ring. No prints led away. I followed them back a few yards, then lost them in the moss and needles. I tried to tell myself they might be mine from setting up, but the tread didn't match. Mine were deeper, with a wider sole. These were narrow and long, like hiking boots from another era. That night, the knocks came again. But this time, they started inside my dream. I heard them before I was fully awake. 3 deep thuds, then silence, then the faint echo. When I opened my eyes, the RV was completely dark. I reached for the flashlight, and as soon as I moved, I heard it again. Not outside, but underneath. It was the sound of something knocking on the underside of the RV. 3 slow, hollow hits. I froze. My breath came out shaky and loud in the small space. I waited, every nerve alive, my hand gripping the flashlight so hard my knuckles hurt. Then a long, scraping sound followed, metal against metal, and stopped near the wheel well. When I finally turned the light on, I aimed it toward the floor, half expecting to see a shadow move beneath the thin metal. Nothing, just silence and my own pulse thundering in my ears. I sat like that until dawn again. When light finally hit the clearing, I went outside, half dreading what I'd find. The ground was damp with dew. I crouched near the RV's base and saw faint smudges of mud under the rear axle, like fingerprints. That was when I decided to drive out early. But when I turned the ignition key, the engine didn't catch. The battery had drained overnight. I'd left nothing running, but the gauge sat flat. I tried again. Nothing. That's when I noticed the forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no water movement, no wind, just stillness so deep it pressed on my eardrums. And then, from somewhere higher up the slope, the knocking returned, slow, deliberate, and followed by its echo. Only this time, the echo wasn't delayed. It was simultaneous. I don't know how long I sat there listening. It felt like the forest had collapsed in on itself, as if every sound had been drawn into that rhythm. Those twin knocks, beating in unison from 2 unseen places. I could feel it through the RV's frame, a faint vibration under my boots like the earth itself was resonating. I stepped out into the morning light, heart hammering. The fog had burned off, leaving the mountain harsh and colorless in the distance. The air was colder than before, sharp in my lungs. I walked a few feet toward the slope, trying to pinpoint the direction of the sound, but the trees distorted it. One moment it came from the ridge, the next from behind me. Then it stopped completely, and the silence that followed was even worse. That was when I saw it, something glinting near the tree line about 50 yards away. It looked like metal, half buried in pine needles. I moved closer slowly, and as I got near, I realized it wasn't random debris. It was the corner of a small cabin roof, caved in and swallowed by undergrowth. The boards were gray and splintered, thick with moss. I recognized it immediately. Echo cabin. The place was smaller than I remembered. One room, no glass left in the windows, just a sagging frame of old timber. The door leaned open, swinging slightly in the breeze, creaking on what was left of its hinges. I knew I shouldn't go near it. Every instinct told me to stay away, but something about that echo, the way it had matched itself, made me feel like the answer to what was happening was up there. I took out my phone to use as a light, even though it had no signal. As soon as I turned it on, the screen flickered, then went black. Dead battery. The timing felt impossible. I'd charged it fully before the trip. I pushed the door with my boot and stepped inside. The air inside the cabin was cold and heavy, the kind that smells of rot and dust that hasn't been disturbed in decades. There were old tools scattered on a table, a rusted hatchet, a cracked lantern, an old ranger patch. But what caught my eye were the carvings on the walls. Hundreds of small vertical lines grouped in threes etched deeply into the timber. Each set spaced perfectly apart, 3 marks, pause, 3 marks. I ran my fingers over them, feeling the grooves, and noticed they went all the way around the cabin, circling every wall like a countdown that never finished. And then I noticed something worse. Beneath the markings, faint words scratched into the wood. It answers. A sound broke the stillness. 3 knocks, this time directly behind me, just outside the door. I turned so fast, my flashlight slipped from my hand and hit the floor. The sound that followed wasn't an echo anymore. It was a reply. From inside the walls, closer than I could stand to believe. Knock, knock, knock. Then silence. I backed out of the cabin, eyes locked on the doorway, waiting for something to move. But nothing did. No figure, no footsteps, just the smell of cold earth and pine. The wind shifted through the trees, and I heard a faint whisper. Not words, but a low murmur that sounded almost like breathing. That's when I ran. I stumbled down the slope, branches catching my sleeves, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't look back. The forest blurred around me in shades of gray and green until I saw the dull silver of my RV through the trees. When I reached it, I jumped inside and slammed the door. I turned the key again, praying for the engine to catch, and this time it sputtered, then roared to life. Relief washed through me so fast it almost hurt. I threw it into drive and tore down that narrow road, gravel spitting out from under the tires. But as I rounded the first curve, I heard it again. From somewhere behind the RV, carried faintly through the open driver's window. Knock, 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 followed instantly by another, softer set, exactly in time. The echo had followed. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway. The sun was dropping behind the ridge by then, turning the mountain orange. I kept driving south until I reached Dunsmuir, where I pulled into an old service station. I told the mechanic I'd been hearing weird sounds near my RV's undercarriage and asked him to check it. He came back 10 minutes later looking uneasy. He said, "Man, I don't know what you've been driving through, but you've got some deep dents under there. Looks like somebody was hitting it with a hammer." My stomach dropped. I stayed the night in a motel by the interstate, didn't sleep much. Every time a truck passed, I swore I heard that dull, rhythmic pounding again. Faint but distinct, hiding under the sound of the tires on wet pavement. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was all explainable. I told myself the dents could have been from rocks or branches, the knocks from warped metal or shifting temperature. But as I loaded my bag into the RV, I noticed something on the side panel near the back wheel. 3 long finger-shaped smears of dried mud, evenly spaced. I drove home anyway. I didn't tell anyone about it for a long time. Not until I started hearing that sound again, months later, not outside, but in recordings. I was sorting through footage I'd taken on that trip, small clips from the dash cam. One of them was a short video of me parked by the stream on the first day, sunlight flickering through the trees. When I played it back, there was a faint knocking in the background. 3 slow hits, then another 3, perfectly matched. I replayed it 5 times, isolating the sound. The waveform showed 2 identical signatures, slightly offset, like the same sound recorded twice milliseconds apart. There was no explanation for that. None. After that, the knocking started showing up in other recordings. Voice notes I'd made weeks later, even a phone call with my sister. Always faint, always in 3s, always followed by that same ghosted echo. I started thinking about those words carved into the cabin wall. It answers. I didn't know what it meant then, but I do now. Whatever that sound is, it isn't just an echo. It's a reflection that learns. It copies what it hears until it becomes indistinguishable from the source. Some nights, when I wake up in my RV parked in the driveway, I'll hear a noise from inside the walls. 3 faint taps like knuckles on metal, and then from outside the exact same sound, perfectly in sync. And I know what it means now. It found its way out. I tried to live with it at first. I thought if I ignored the sound, it would fade like a bad dream. But the thing about silence is, it makes space for what you're running from. The quieter I tried to keep my life, the clearer it became. It started small, random sounds that seemed to double themselves. A cabinet door closing in the kitchen, followed instantly by a softer thud from the living room. The hum of the refrigerator splitting, one sound just slightly out of sync with the other. Sometimes I'd talk to myself without realizing it, and then hear my own words spoken back. Half a breath late, lower, distorted. I stopped playing music, stopped using the radio in the RV. Even the sound of running water unsettled me, the way it carried its own rhythm, echoing faintly under the pipes. Every place I went, every new silence, it found me again. That dull repetition, that answering. At first, I thought I was losing it. I booked an appointment with a doctor in Reading, told him about the headaches, the sleep issues, the constant ringing in my ears. He said it sounded like tinnitus or stress. I didn't argue. I took the pills he prescribed, nodded when he told me to get rest. But the truth was, I didn't want rest. I didn't want stillness. Stillness was where it came alive. 2 months passed like that. Then, one night in late December, I woke to the sound of something shifting inside the RV. It wasn't the familiar knock. It was the creak of weight moving across the floor, soft and patient. I stayed perfectly still, eyes open in the dark. My breath fogged faintly in the cold air. I reached for the flashlight, clicked it on, and froze. The beam cut across the small space. Nothing there. The air looked thick, full of dust. But the moment I whispered hello, something whispered back. Hello. Same word, same voice, my own voice. It came from the wall behind the driver's seat, as though someone were pressed up against the outer panel, repeating after me. My throat went dry. I whispered again, "Who's there?" And the reply came, "Who's there?" But slower, a second later. That was when I realized it wasn't mimicking my words anymore. It was matching my timing. Each syllable I spoke came back with the same length, the same breath, but slightly delayed, like a perfect shadow trying to catch up. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat with the lights on until morning, hands shaking, waiting for something to happen. When the sun finally rose, everything looked normal again, normal enough that I could almost believe was in my head. Almost. A few weeks later, I made the mistake of going back. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I thought facing it would end it. Maybe I just wanted to understand what I'd brought home with me. Either way, I drove north again. Same highway, same mountain. The snow had started to melt along the lower roads, leaving that wet, metallic smell in the air again. When I reached the old forestry road, I parked halfway up instead of driving to the clearing. The place felt different now, emptier, heavier. Even the wind moved slower, dragging through the trees like breath. I walked the rest of the way on foot, boots sinking into soft ground. Every step made that familiar crunch, one I used to find comforting. But after each step came another, faint and perfect, half a second behind. I turned around more than once. Nothing, just trees and fog and that invisible following rhythm. When I reached the stream, I saw my old fire ring still half intact. The stones were blackened from months ago. Beside them, half buried in moss, lay something metal, the old lantern from Echo Cabin. I hadn't brought it with me. I remembered leaving it on that cabin table. I stared at it for a long time. The air around me was completely still. No wind, no birds, no trickle of water. The entire mountain seemed to be holding its breath. Then came the sound. 3 knocks, soft, steady, from up the slope, followed instantly by 3 more from behind me. I turned, and through the trees I saw movement, not a person, not clearly. More like the impression of someone, a darker shadow among the trunks, shifting as though caught between 2 places. I called out, voice shaking, "Who are you?" No answer, only the knock again. Then this time the echo came not from the forest, but from inside me. I felt my own chest vibrate, like something was resonating under my ribs. The second rhythm wasn't external anymore. It was synced to my pulse. That broke something in me. I started shouting, nonsense, anything, trying to drown it out. My voice came back in layers, delayed, folding over itself until I couldn't tell which sound was mine anymore. The forest seemed to pulse with it. Every tree trunk, every stone, every inch of air repeating that rhythm. Then suddenly, silence. I don't know how long it lasted, maybe seconds, maybe hours. But when the quiet finally lifted, I realized I was standing right at the door of the cabin again. I don't remember walking there. The door was still open, hanging crookedly. Inside, there was a sound. Not knocking this time. Breathing. Slow, steady, matching my own. I took 1 step closer, heart pounding, then another. The air inside shimmered faintly, like heat rising from asphalt. For a moment, I thought I saw a shape, a human outline, faint as smoke, standing where the light met shadow, its head tilted slightly, like it was listening. And then I understood. It wasn't trying to scare me. It wasn't hunting me. It was becoming me. Every word I'd spoken, every sound I'd made, it had been copying, refining, until the echo and the source were indistinguishable. The air vibrated once, twice. Then came the final sound, a perfect, synchronized knock, both from inside and outside the cabin walls. And when it stopped, I didn't hear anything else, not even my own breathing. For a moment, it felt like I had disappeared, like I had been absorbed into that answering silence. When I woke, the sky was gray. I was lying by the stream again, no cabin in sight. My hands were covered in dirt, and my throat was raw, like I'd been shouting for hours. The RV was still parked where I'd left it. Everything looked untouched. But when I climbed inside and shut the door, the silence was wrong again. Too full, too even. That's when I realized what it had done. When I spoke, there was no echo anymore, no delay. The sound came back instantly, perfectly aligned. My voice doubled. It had finished learning. That was months ago. I still live in the RV, still drive sometimes, but I don't go near the mountains anymore. I keep moving, always south, always away. Yet no matter where I park, when night falls and the wind dies, I'll hear it again, that subtle, perfect return sound, matching every word, every breath. Sometimes I wonder if that's all we are, just echoes trying to become real. Maybe the mountain was only showing me what happens when a voice refuses to fade. I don't know what that thing was or why it chose me. But I've learned something out here. Silence isn't peace, it's potential. It's waiting to be filled by whatever dares to answer. And every night when I lie awake and hear my own voice whisper back to me from the dark, I remind myself, it's not just the mountain that echoes anymore. It's me.